Bumpy Johnson walked into a room full of men who feared him, and somehow he still wasn't the most dangerous person there. That title belonged to his wife, and according to accounts passed down for decades, one Italian man learned this the hard way, in front of everyone, in a way he never forgot. This is the story of what happened when someone disrespected Mayme Johnson, the wife of Harlem's most feared man, Bumpy Johnson. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why people in Harlem still whisper about this moment today. Let's set the scene. The year is sometime in the 1950s, Harlem, New York. Bumpy Johnson is not just a man on the street, he is on the street. Stories claim that nothing moved in Harlem without his knowledge. Not a dice game, not a numbers run, not a whisper in a barbershop. He had built a reputation as a man of code. He didn't hurt women, he didn't hurt children, and most of all, he protected his own with a kind of loyalty that bordered on obsession. And at the center of his world was Mayme Hatcher Johnson. She wasn't just his wife. By many accounts, she was his anchor. Educated, sharp, calm under pressure, she moved through Harlem with a kind of quiet confidence that made people respect her on sight. She didn't need Bumpy's name to command a room, but everyone knew whose wife she was. Now here's where the story gets interesting. According to several accounts that have circulated through Harlem oral history, Bumpy and the Italian mob bosses downtown had an uneasy peace. This wasn't friendship, it was business. Harlem ran its own rackets, and the Italian families downtown ran theirs. There was an understanding, a line neither side was supposed to cross. Bumpy respected that line, even when it didn't favor him. But understandings between powerful men are fragile things, and one night, that fragile peace was tested. The story goes that Mayme was attending a function. Some accounts say it was a nightclub, others say it was a more formal gathering tied to business between the two sides. Either way, men from both worlds were in the same room, drinking, talking, sizing each other up the way powerful men do. And then it happened. An Italian man, said to be connected to one of the downtown families, approached Mayme. Maybe he didn't know who she was. Maybe he didn't care. According to the stories, he said something to her that crossed a line, something disrespectful, something that suggested he didn't see her as untouchable. Some versions say it was a crude comment about her appearance. Other versions say he put his hands somewhere they didn't belong. The details shift depending on who's telling the story, because this is oral history, passed mouth to mouth through generations of Harlem residents. But the core of the story never changes. He disrespected Bumpy Johnson's wife, in public, in front of witnesses. Now, put yourself in that room for a second. Imagine the silence that must have followed. Imagine the look on Mayme's face, and imagine the look on Bumpy's. Because here's something you need to understand about Bumpy Johnson. He was known as a calm man, a reader of poetry, a chess player. He didn't explode with rage in public. He didn't need to. Many who knew him say his danger came from his stillness. When Bumpy got quiet, that's when you needed to worry. According to the accounts, Bumpy didn't yell. He didn't make a scene right there. He simply looked at the man, said something short, and let the moment pass without violence in that exact room. Some say he just said, "You don't know who you just spoke to," and walked away. But walking away didn't mean it was over. Far from it. What happened next is where the legend really takes shape, and where historians and storytellers start to disagree on details, but agree on the outcome. According to multiple versions of this story, Bumpy made sure word got back to the Italian families about what their man had done. Not as a complaint, as a warning, because in the world Bumpy operated in, disrespecting a man's wife wasn't just personal, it was a violation of the code that kept the peace between Harlem and downtown. If that code broke, business broke, profits broke. And powerful men on both sides understood that bad business was bad for everyone. Some stories claim the Italian bosses themselves were embarrassed by what their associate had done. They knew Bumpy's reputation. They knew that letting this slide could mean war in the streets, the kind of war that costs everyone money and bodies. So, according to several accounts, it was the Italian side that handled their own man. Whether that meant he was beaten, exiled from the business, or something far more permanent, the stories don't all agree. Many believe he simply disappeared from the scene entirely, never to be seen running numbers or doing business in that circle again. Other versions of the story go further and claim Bumpy made sure the man understood his mistake personally. In a private meeting, where words were exchanged that left no doubt about what would happen if it ever happened again. These versions don't claim outright violence because there's no solid documentation of that. But they do agree on one thing: that man never disrespected Mayme Johnson or anyone connected to Bumpy ever again. Now, why does this story matter so much, even decades later? Because it tells you everything about who Bumpy Johnson really was. He wasn't just a man who ran numbers and controlled blocks. He was a man whose power was built on respect, and the moment that respect was challenged, especially when it came to his wife, the response was swift and absolute, even if it didn't always come through fists. Mayme herself, in later interviews and in her own memoir written years after Bumpy's passing, painted a picture of a marriage built on real partnership. She wasn't a passive figure standing beside a powerful man. She was sharp, she was present, and by many accounts, she handled herself with grace even in moments of danger. The story of that night, whatever version you believe, shows a woman who didn't need saving, paired with a man who made sure no one ever tested that twice. It's worth saying clearly here, because honesty matters in telling this story right. Much of what surrounds Bumpy Johnson exists in that grey area between documented fact and Harlem legend. He was a real man, with a real arrest record, real time served, and a real reputation built over decades on the streets of New York. But many of the specific moments people tell about him, including this one, come from oral history, second-hand accounts, and stories shared by people who knew him or knew people who knew him. There is no court transcript, no newspaper clipping that confirms every detail of this exact night. What we have are accounts, consistent in their core, that have survived because they capture something true about the man, even if the precise facts have blurred with time. And maybe that's exactly why the story has lasted. Because in a community where written records of black life in that era were often incomplete or ignored entirely, oral history became the record. The way Bumpy Johnson is remembered, through these stories, tells you what Harlem needed him to be: a protector, a man whose word meant something, a husband who would not let his wife be diminished, not by anyone, not even by men with the backing of powerful families downtown. So, whether this exact night happened precisely as described, or whether it's a story shaped and reshaped through decades of retelling, the message at its center never changes. Bumpy Johnson built an empire on respect, and the one thing nobody was ever allowed to touch was his family. If you found this story interesting, there are dozens more like it buried in Harlem's history. Stories of power, loyalty, and lines that were never meant to be crossed. Stick around, because the next one might surprise you even more.